It was a bright Saturday morning when Lisa and Tom decided to embark on a spontaneous road trip. Their relationship had always thrived on these adventures. No maps, no destinations, just their car, good music, and the open road. After driving for hours, they stumbled upon a small, sleepy town nestled between rolling hills. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. "Let's stop here for a bit," Lisa said, her eyes scanning the quaint downtown area. Rows of old brick buildings, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a few locals walking lazily down the street made it look like something out of a 1950s postcard. Lisa loved places like this. She had a soft spot for the forgotten corners of the world, where treasures lay hidden in plain sight. As they walked hand in hand, Lisa's attention was drawn to a small antique shop tucked between a bakery and a hardware store. The shop's sign, "Whispering Relics," was faded and weather-beaten, as though it hadn't been repainted in decades. A bell jingled as they pushed open the heavy wooden door. Inside, the shop smelled of mildew and old wood, and the air was thick with silence, broken only by the faint creak of the floorboards beneath their feet. "Creepy," Tom muttered, glancing around at the dimly lit interior. "This place looks straight out of a horror movie." Lisa ignored him. She was already scanning the shelves, her eyes lighting up as they landed on dusty books, tarnished jewelry, and porcelain figurines. Her love for antiques wasn't just a hobby, it was a passion. She loved imagining the stories behind the objects, the lives they'd been part of, the secrets they held. Then she saw it, the doll. It sat on the top shelf of a bookcase at the back of the store, partially hidden behind a stack of old photo frames. Lisa felt a strange pull toward it, as if it was calling to her. She reached up and carefully pulled it down, brushing off a layer of dust. The doll was about 2 feet tall, with porcelain skin that was slightly cracked in places, giving it an aged, eerie look. Its hair was an unnatural shade of yellow, styled in tight ringlets, and its painted blue eyes seemed almost lifelike. It wore a white dress with lace trim and a red ribbon tied around its waist. "Tom, look at this," Lisa said, holding the doll up for him to see. Tom wrinkled his nose. "Yikes, that thing's creepy as hell." Lisa laughed. "Come on, it's just a doll." "Yeah, a doll straight out of a nightmare," Tom replied, taking a step back as if it might come to life and bite him. "You're not seriously thinking about buying that, are you?" "Of course I am," Lisa said, cradling the doll in her arms. "It's unique. It'll be perfect for our collection." Tom sighed. He knew better than to argue with Lisa when she got like this. Her collection of vintage dolls already took up an entire shelf in their living room, and every time he suggested they might have enough, she found a way to convince him otherwise. As they approached the counter, the shopkeeper emerged from a door behind the register. She was an elderly woman, her gray hair pulled back into a tight bun. Her sharp eyes immediately landed on the doll in Lisa's hands, and her expression darkened. "You don't want that one," the shopkeeper said, her voice low and firm. Lisa hesitated. "Why not?" The woman's eyes flicked to the doll and back to Lisa. "It's not for sale." Lisa frowned. "But it was on the shelf." "I don't care where you found it," the shopkeeper snapped. "It's not for sale." Lisa glanced at Tom, who shrugged. "I'll pay double," Lisa offered, holding out the doll as if to prove it wasn't dangerous. The shopkeeper's face softened, but only slightly. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "That doll, it's cursed. Bad things happen to people who own it." Lisa's heart skipped a beat, but she quickly brushed off the uneasy feeling. "Cursed? Come on, it's just a story, right? A doll can't be cursed." The shopkeeper didn't smile. "You'd be wise to leave it here." But Lisa was stubborn. She couldn't explain it, but she felt a strange connection to the doll, as if it was meant to be hers. "I'll take my chances," she said, pulling out her wallet. The shopkeeper sighed, shaking her head. "Don't say I didn't warn you." As Lisa and Tom left the shop, the bell jingled again, and the shopkeeper watched them go with a look of pity. "Fools," she muttered under her breath. Back at home, Lisa placed the doll on the center shelf in their living room. It looked perfect, surrounded by her other collectibles. She smiled, admiring how it seemed to complete the display. Tom, on the other hand, gave it a wide berth, muttering something about it looking like it would come alive at night. That night, as they sat on the couch watching TV, the power flickered, the lights dimmed, and the TV screen went black for a moment before coming back on. Lisa frowned. "That's weird. Did you pay the electric bill?" "Of course I did," Tom replied, but he looked uneasy. Probably just a glitch. They didn't think much of it until later that night. As Lisa lay in bed, she thought she heard faint whispers coming from the living room. She nudged Tom awake. "Do you hear that?" Tom groaned, half asleep. "It's probably the wind. Go back to sleep." But Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She got up and tiptoed to the living room. The whispers stopped as soon as she entered, and everything seemed normal. Annabelle sat on the shelf, exactly where Lisa had left her. Lisa shook her head and laughed nervously. "I'm being ridiculous," she muttered. But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. The next morning, Lisa woke up feeling oddly restless. The whispers she'd heard the night before lingered in her mind, but she decided not to tell Tom. He'd already teased her enough about buying the doll, and she didn't want to give him more reasons to call her paranoid. As she sipped her coffee, she glanced at the shelf where Annabelle sat. Something felt off. Lisa tilted her head and stared at the doll. Its position had changed. She was sure she had left it sitting upright, legs dangling over the edge of the shelf. But now, Annabelle was leaning slightly to the left, her head tilted downward, as if she were staring at the floor. "Did you touch the doll?" Lisa called out to Tom, who was in the kitchen rummaging for cereal. "Nope," Tom replied. "I don't go near that creepy thing." Lisa frowned. Maybe she'd bumped the shelf while dusting. She reached out to adjust the doll's position, but as her fingers brushed against its porcelain arm, a sudden chill ran through her body. The air around her felt colder, and for a moment she swore the doll's painted blue eyes shifted, following her hand. She yanked her hand back and took a deep breath. "It's just a doll," she whispered to herself. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, and Lisa began to feel silly for letting her imagination run wild. That night, however, things took a darker turn. At around 2 a.m., Lisa woke up to a sound that made her skin crawl. It was soft laughter, high-pitched and childlike, echoing faintly through the house. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding. Tom was snoring beside her, oblivious to the noise. Lisa strained her ears, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. It seemed to drift from the living room. Clutching her phone for light, she slid out of bed and crept down the hallway. The house was eerily quiet now, except for the faint creak of the floorboards beneath her feet. When she reached the living room, her breath caught in her throat. Annabelle was no longer on the shelf. The spot where the doll had sat was empty. Lisa's eyes darted around the room, searching for it. Her phone's flashlight swept over the couch, the coffee table, and finally landed on the dining table. There it was. Annabelle was sitting on one of the chairs, her head tilted to the side, as if she'd been waiting for Lisa to find her. Lisa froze, her pulse hammering in her ears. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Slowly she stepped closer, her shaking hand reaching out to touch the doll. She needed to know if she was losing her mind. Before her fingers could make contact, the chair Annabelle was sitting on shifted slightly, as if someone had pushed it. Lisa stumbled backward, a scream lodged in her throat. At that moment, Tom appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked groggily. Lisa pointed at the doll, her voice trembling. It moved." Tom squinted at the dining table. "What are you talking about? It's a doll." "No, you don't understand," Lisa said, her voice rising. "It wasn't there. It was on the shelf. I didn't move it." Tom sighed and walked over to the table, picking up Annabelle and holding it out to her. "See? It's just a doll. You probably forgot you moved it." Lisa shook her head. "I didn't forget. I know I didn't." Tom placed the doll back on the shelf and turned to Lisa. "You're overthinking this. Let's go back to bed." But Lisa couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong with Annabelle. The next morning, Lisa decided to test her theory. She placed Annabelle back on the shelf and took a picture with her phone, making sure to capture its exact position. "There," she said to herself. "Now I'll know if it moves again." She went about her day, trying to keep her mind off the doll. When Tom left for work, she busied herself with cleaning and organizing the house. But the unease never left her. Later that evening, she pulled out her phone to check the photo she'd taken. The image showed Annabelle sitting on the shelf, exactly as she'd left it. Satisfied, Lisa set her phone down and walked into the kitchen to start dinner. When she returned to the living room a few minutes later, her stomach dropped. Annabelle was no longer on the shelf. Instead, it was sitting on the couch, its head tilted slightly, as if watching the TV. Lisa's hands shook as she checked her phone again. The photo still showed the doll on the shelf. How could this be happening? She hadn't heard anyone come into the house, and Tom wasn't home yet. She slowly approached the couch, her heart pounding in her chest. "Annabelle," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What are you?" The doll stared back at her, with its lifeless, painted eyes. Lisa felt a chill creep up her spine. She reached out to pick it up, but as soon as her fingers touched the doll, a loud crash echoed from the kitchen. Lisa screamed and dropped Annabelle onto the floor. When she rushed into the kitchen, she found the cabinet doors wide open, and every single dish and glass had been thrown onto the floor. Shards of porcelain and glass were scattered everywhere. Lisa backed away, her breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. By the time Tom came home, Lisa was sitting on the couch, trembling. Annabelle was back on the shelf, but Lisa couldn't bring herself to look at it. "What's going on?" Tom asked, taking in the mess in the kitchen. Lisa explained everything. The laughter, the doll moving, the cabinet doors flying open. Tom listened, his expression growing more serious. "Are you sure you didn't just imagine some of it?" he asked carefully. Lisa glared at him. "Do you think I smashed all the dishes just for fun? Something is wrong with that doll, Tom. I'm not crazy." Tom sighed and walked over to the shelf, picking up Annabelle. "Look, I'll put it in the closet, okay? Out of sight, out of mind." Lisa watched as he placed the doll in the hall closet and shut the door. For the first time that evening, she felt a small sense of relief. But deep down, she knew it wasn't over. That night, Lisa tried her best to put the events of the day behind her. She told herself over and over that Tom was right. Maybe she was overthinking. It was probably just her imagination running wild. But no matter how hard she tried to convince herself, a knot of unease remained in her stomach. Tom, as usual, had fallen asleep almost immediately. But Lisa lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards. She checked her phone. 2:47 a.m. Her chest tightened. It was the same time she'd heard the eerie laughter the night before. Just as she was beginning to relax, a soft thud broke the silence. Lisa froze. The sound had come from the hallway. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct enough to send a chill down her spine. She held her breath, straining her ears. Another thud, followed by a faint scraping noise like something being dragged across the floor. Her heart raced. She nudged Tom, whispering, "Tom, wake up." Tom groaned and rolled over, his voice heavy with sleep. "What is it now?" "I heard something," Lisa said, her voice trembling. Tom sighed. "It's probably the house settling. Go back to sleep." "No," Lisa insisted. "It's coming from the hallway." Tom sat up, rubbing his face. "Fine, I'll check." Lisa followed him as he got out of bed and headed toward the hallway. Tom flicked on the light and they both froze. The door to the hall closet was wide open. "I thought you closed it," Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible. "I did," Tom replied, his brow furrowing. He walked over to the closet, peering inside. Annabelle was sitting on the floor, her head tilted upward, as if looking directly at him. Tom let out a nervous laugh. "Okay, that's creepy. Did you open the door?" Lisa shook her head vehemently. "I didn't touch it." Tom picked up the doll and placed it back on the shelf in the closet. He closed the door, this time making sure it clicked shut. "There, it's fine. Now let's go back to bed." But Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. She kept glancing back at the hallway as they returned to the bedroom, her stomach churning with unease. An hour later, Lisa woke up with a start. At first, she wasn't sure what had roused her, but then she noticed it, the faint sound of footsteps. They were soft, almost imperceptible, but they were definitely there, moving slowly down the hallway. Lisa sat up, her heart pounding. The footsteps stopped just outside the bedroom door. She stared at the door, holding her breath, her mind racing. What should she do? Should she wake Tom again? Before she could decide, the door creaked open, just a few inches. Lisa's blood ran cold. She could see the hallway light spilling into the room, but there was no one there. Her eyes darted around, searching for the source of the sound, when she noticed something that made her stomach drop. A shadow. It was faint, but unmistakable. A shadow stretching across the hallway floor, cast by something standing just out of sight. The shape was small, childlike and unmoving. Lisa's throat went dry. "Tom," she whispered, shaking him awake. "What now?" Tom groaned, sitting up. Lisa pointed to the door, her hand trembling. "There's something in the hallway." Tom squinted at the door, his expression skeptical. "There's nothing there." "Look at the shadow," Lisa hissed, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom followed her gaze and froze. He saw it too, the faint outline of something standing in the hallway. Slowly, he got out of bed and approached the door. Lisa wanted to stop him, to beg him not to go, but her voice caught in her throat. Tom yanked the door open, stepping into the hallway. "Hello? Is someone there?" The shadow vanished. Tom turned back to Lisa, his face pale. "There's nothing here," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Maybe it was just a trick of the light." Lisa shook her head. "No, it was real. I saw it." Tom sighed and closed the door. "Let's just get some sleep. We're both tired, and this is messing with our heads." Lisa didn't argue, but she couldn't sleep. The shadow was burned into her mind, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong with the doll. The next morning, Lisa decided she'd had enough. She grabbed Annabelle from the closet and brought it out to the backyard. Tom watched from the kitchen, shaking his head. "What are you doing?" he called. "I'm getting rid of it," Lisa said, setting the doll on the ground. Tom walked outside, crossing his arms. "Come on, Lisa. It's just a doll. You're overreacting." Lisa glared at him. "You didn't see what I saw. This thing is evil, Tom. I don't want it in the house anymore." Before Tom could argue, Lisa grabbed a match from the grill and lit it. She held the flame to the corner of Annabelle's dress, watching as the fabric began to smolder. But as soon as the fire caught, a sudden gust of wind blew through the yard, snuffing out the flames. Lisa stared at the doll, her hands shaking. The charred edge of the dress seemed almost to repair itself, the blackened fabric fading back to white. Tom's jaw dropped. "Okay, that's weird." Lisa turned to him, her eyes wide with fear. "Do you believe me now?" Tom didn't answer. He just stared at the doll, his face pale. Finally, he nodded. "Yeah, I believe you." After the failed attempt to burn Annabelle, Lisa and Tom stood in stunned silence. The doll lay on the ground, eerily untouched. The charred edge of its dress had vanished, as if mocking their efforts to destroy it. Lisa felt a wave of nausea rise in her chest. "This isn't normal," she whispered. "Something's wrong with that doll." Tom nodded, his expression grim. "Okay, you're right. We need to get rid of it. But maybe not like this." Lisa shot him a wary look. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," Tom admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But burning it clearly doesn't work. Maybe we need to take it to someone who knows about this kind of stuff. A psychic or a priest." Lisa hesitated. The idea of involving someone else felt both comforting and terrifying. What if the doll was too dangerous? What if it hurt someone else? But before she could voice her concerns, the sound of the wind chimes on their porch caught her attention. They were swaying violently, even though there was no breeze. Lisa took a step back. "Tom, do you see that?" Tom followed her gaze and frowned. "Yeah, that's not normal." As they watched, the chimes stopped suddenly, as if an invisible hand had stilled them. The air grew heavy, the atmosphere thick with an unspoken warning. Lisa's skin prickled. and she felt the undeniable sensation of being watched. "We need to go inside," she said hurriedly, grabbing Tom's arm. Tom didn't argue. He picked up Annabelle reluctantly and carried it back into the house. Lisa flinched as he set the doll down on the coffee table. "Why are you bringing it back in?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I don't want to leave it outside," Tom replied. "What if something happens to it and it gets worse?" "Worse?" Lisa repeated, incredulous. "How could it get worse?" Tom didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed his phone. "I'm going to call Father James. He's the pastor at my parents' church. Maybe he can help." Lisa nodded, though her gut told her the doll wasn't going to let them off that easy. Father James arrived a few hours later, a kind-looking man in his 60s with a calm demeanor. He listened patiently as Lisa and Tom recounted the events of the past few days. Lisa noticed that his expression grew more serious as the story went on. When they were finished, he leaned back in his chair, his hands folded. "This is troubling," he said slowly. "Objects like this aren't common, but they're not unheard of. It's possible the doll is a vessel." "A vessel?" Lisa repeated, her voice shaky. "For what?" Father James hesitated. "For something dark. A spirit, or perhaps something worse. Whatever it is, it's attached itself to this doll, likely because it sees it as a way to interact with our world." Tom frowned. "But why? Why a doll?" "Dolls are often used in rituals," Father James explained. "They're seen as human-like, which makes them appealing to spirits looking for a connection, and sometimes they're simply chosen because they're available." Lisa shuddered. "So what do we do? How do we get rid of it?" Father James reached into his bag and pulled out a small vial of holy water, a crucifix, and a Bible. "I'll perform a blessing and attempt to cleanse the doll. If the spirit is willing to leave, this should work." Lisa and Tom exchanged a nervous glance but nodded. Father James stood and approached the doll, his movements deliberate. He placed the crucifix on the coffee table beside Annabelle and began to pray. At first, nothing happened. But as Father James sprinkled holy water on the doll, the air in the room grew colder. Lisa's breath fogged in front of her, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. The lights flickered, and a low guttural growl echoed through the room. Father James faltered, his voice wavering. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I command you to leave this vessel." The growl grew louder, more menacing. Lisa clutched Tom's arm, her nails digging into his skin. Annabelle's head tilted slightly, and Lisa swore the doll's lips moved, forming a word she couldn't hear. Suddenly, the crucifix on the table flew across the room, slamming into the wall with enough force to leave a dent. Father James stumbled backward, his face pale. This is not an ordinary spirit," he said, his voice trembling. Lisa's heart sank. "What does that mean?" "It means," Father James said, his tone grave, "that whatever is attached to this doll is powerful, more powerful than I anticipated." Father James left shortly after, promising to consult with his colleagues and return with a plan. Lisa and Tom were left alone with Annabelle. The doll was sitting silently on the coffee table. The house felt colder, darker, as if the spirit had grown angrier. Lisa couldn't take her eyes off the doll. It felt alive, like it was watching her, mocking her. "We can't wait for him to come back," she said suddenly. "We have to do something now." Tom hesitated. "What if we make it worse?" "It's already worse," Lisa snapped. "We need to get rid of it. Throw it in the river, bury it, I don't care. Just get it out of this house." Tom sighed. "Okay, let's get rid of it. But we need to be careful." As they prepared to leave, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that Annabelle was aware of their plan. The doll's unblinking gaze seemed to follow them as they moved around the room. Deep down, Lisa knew this wasn't going to be easy. Whatever was attached to Annabelle wasn't going to let go without a fight. Lisa and Tom decided to take Annabelle far from their home. Tom grabbed a cardboard box from the garage and placed the doll inside, sealing it shut with duct tape. Lisa watched him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, trying to suppress the growing dread in her stomach. "Where are we taking it?" she asked, her voice shaky. "There's an old quarry about 30 miles from here," Tom replied. "We'll toss it into the water. It's deep enough that no one will ever find it." Lisa hesitated. "Do you think it'll stay down there?" "It has to," Tom said firmly, though the uncertainty in his eyes betrayed him. The car ride was tense. Lisa kept glancing at the box on the back seat, half expecting it to move. The air in the car felt thick, stifling, and the silence between them was oppressive. Even the radio, which Tom had turned on to fill the void, emitted nothing but static. "Did you check the station?" Lisa asked nervously. Tom fiddled with the dial, but no matter how much he adjusted it, the static persisted. "That's weird," he muttered. "It was working fine earlier." Lisa's unease deepened. "Turn it off. I don't like it." Tom obliged, and the car fell into an eerie quiet, broken only by the hum of the engine and the faint rustle of the trees as they sped down the deserted road. As they neared the quarry, the headlights flickered. Lisa's heart jumped. What was that? Tom gripped the wheel tighter. Probably just a loose connection. But the flickering grew worse, and then, without warning, the headlights went out entirely. The car was plunged into darkness, the road ahead barely visible under the pale glow of the moon. "Tom!" Lisa cried. I know," Tom said, his voice tense. He slowed the car, pulling over to the side of the road. "Let me check the fuse." Lisa stayed in the car as Tom got out, popping the hood. She watched him through the windshield, her anxiety growing with each passing second. The shadows of the trees seemed to stretch toward him, twisting and writhing like living things. A sudden thud jolted Lisa from her thoughts. She turned to see the box in the back seat, trembling, as if something inside was trying to escape. "Tom!" she screamed. "It's moving!" Tom slammed the hood shut and rushed back to the car. "What's wrong?" Lisa pointed to the box, her eyes wide with terror. "It's the doll! It's trying to get out!" Tom stared at the box, his jaw tightening. "Stay here." He opened the back door and grabbed the box, holding it at arm's length as if it might bite him. "We're almost there. Let's just get this over with." Lisa nodded, though her legs felt like jelly as she stepped out of the car. She followed Tom down the narrow dirt path leading to the quarry, her flashlight casting long, flickering shadows on the ground. The quarry was eerily silent, the water a black, glassy surface under the moonlight. Tom set the box down near the edge and pulled out a pocket knife to cut the tape. "What are you doing?" Lisa asked, her voice rising with panic. "I'm making sure it's still inside," Tom said. "I'm not throwing an empty box in the water." "Just leave it," Lisa urged. "We don't need to open it." But Tom ignored her. With a quick slice, he cut through the tape and pried the flaps open. Annabelle sat inside, as motionless as ever. her glassy eyes reflecting the moonlight. "See," Tom said, though his voice was shaky. "It's just a doll." Lisa didn't respond. She couldn't take her eyes off Annabelle. Something about the way the doll was sitting looked off. Its head was tilted slightly, almost as if it were listening. Tom grabbed the box and hurled it into the water. It hit the surface with a loud splash, sinking quickly into the depths. Lisa let out a shaky breath, relief washing over her. "It's done," Tom said, turning to her. "Let's go home." They were halfway back to the car when the sound of laughter stopped them in their tracks. It was faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the rustling of the trees. But as they stood frozen, it grew louder, more distinct, a high-pitched, childlike giggle that sent chills racing down Lisa's spine. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Tom nodded, his face pale. "Let's keep moving." But as they quickened their pace, the laughter followed them, growing louder and more menacing. Lisa's flashlight flickered and she stopped dead in her tracks as a shadow appeared on the path ahead. It was small and hunched, its outline unmistakable. "No," Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. "It can't be." The shadow began to move, stepping into the beam of her flashlight. Annabelle stood there, dripping wet, her head tilted and her eyes fixed on Lisa. Tom grabbed Lisa's arm, pulling her back. "Run!" They sprinted down the path, the laughter echoing all around them. Lisa's lungs burned, and her legs felt like lead, but she didn't dare slow down. When they finally reached the car, Tom fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. "Hurry!" Lisa cried, glancing over her shoulder. Annabelle was nowhere to be seen, but the laughter still lingered in the air. Tom managed to unlock the door, and they both scrambled inside. He started the engine, and the car roared to life. But as they sped away, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. She glanced into the back seat and froze. Annabelle was sitting there, her head tilted and her lips curved into a faint, sinister smile. Lisa's scream pierced the silence inside the car as her eyes locked on Annabelle, seated in the back seat. Tom turned sharply to look, and his knuckles whitened as he gripped the steering wheel. How is it here?" Lisa stammered, her voice trembling. Tom didn't answer. He slammed on the brakes, skidding the car to a stop in the middle of the deserted road. The sudden jolt threw Lisa forward against her seatbelt. Annabelle remained perfectly still, her glassy eyes fixed on the rearview mirror as if taunting them. "Get it out!" Lisa shouted, her voice cracking. Tom reached back, hesitating as his hand hovered over the doll. Something about touching it again felt like an invitation to disaster, but he forced himself to grab it by the arm and fling it out of the car. The doll hit the road with a thud and lay motionless, its head cocked unnaturally to one side. Without another word, Tom stepped on the gas and the car sped away. Lisa glanced out the rear window, watching the doll grow smaller and smaller until it vanished into the darkness. "Is it gone?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom nodded, though the tension in his jaw betrayed his unease. "Yeah, it's gone. It has to be." The rest of the drive home was silent, but the atmosphere felt heavy, oppressive. Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't seen the last of Annabelle. When they pulled into their driveway, the house loomed before them, dark and uninviting. Tom turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, staring straight ahead. "Do you think it's over?" he asked finally. Lisa shook her head. I don't know, but I don't feel safe here anymore. Tom sighed and reached for her hand. We'll figure this out, together. They stepped out of the car, their movements slow and cautious, as if expecting something to jump out at them. The house was eerily quiet as they entered, the kind of silence that made the hair on the back of Lisa's neck stand up. Let's just try to get some sleep, Tom suggested. We'll deal with everything in the morning. Lisa didn't argue. She was too exhausted, both physically and emotionally, to put up a fight. They locked all the doors and windows, double-checking each one before retreating to their bedroom. Lisa had just begun to drift off when she heard it, a faint tapping sound coming from somewhere inside the house. Her eyes snapped open, her heart pounding in her chest. She lay still, straining to hear, but the sound stopped. Tom, she whispered, nudging him. Do you hear that? Tom groaned, half asleep. Hear what? Listen, Lisa urged. They both fell silent, and after a moment, the sound returned. Tap, tap, tap. It was slow, deliberate, and far too rhythmic to be a coincidence. It's coming from downstairs, Tom said, his voice low. Lisa shook her head, her stomach twisting with dread. It can't be. We locked everything. Tom slipped out of bed and grabbed the baseball bat he kept under the bed for emergencies. Stay here, he told Lisa. No way, she said, following him. I'm not staying here alone. Together, they crept downstairs, their footsteps muffled by the carpet. The tapping grew louder as they approached the living room. When they reached the bottom of the stairs, Lisa froze. Annabelle was sitting on the couch, her head tilted and her hand resting on the glass coffee table. She was tapping her tiny fingers against the surface, her movements deliberate and unnaturally smooth. No, Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible. This isn't possible. Tom tightened his grip on the bat. How did you get in here? He demanded, as if the doll might answer. Annabelle didn't move, but the tapping stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with anticipation. Then, without warning, the lights flickered, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Lisa could see her breath fogging in front of her. Tom, she began. But before she could finish, the doll's head snapped toward them with a sharp crack. Its glassy eyes seemed to glow in the dim light, and a low, guttural laugh filled the room. Tom swung the bat, aiming for the doll, but before it could connect, the room erupted into chaos. The coffee table shattered, the shards flying through the air like shrapnel. Lisa screamed as she ducked, covering her head with her arms. Get out of the house, Tom shouted, grabbing Lisa's arm and pulling her toward the door. But the door wouldn't budge. No matter how hard Tom pulled or how much Lisa pushed, it remained firmly shut, as if an invisible force were holding it in place. The laughter grew louder, echoing around them, and the sound of footsteps, small, rapid footsteps, filled the room. Lisa turned to see Annabelle standing upright on the shattered remains of the coffee table. The doll took a single step forward, its movements jerky but purposeful. What do you want? Lisa cried, her voice breaking. The laughter stopped abruptly, and for a moment, the room was silent. Then in a voice that was both childlike and deeply sinister, Annabelle spoke. You. Lisa's knees buckled, and she collapsed to the floor, tears streaming down her face. Tom dropped the bat and grabbed her, shaking her shoulders. Stay with me, Lisa. Don't give in. But Lisa couldn't look away from the doll. Its glassy eyes seemed to bore into her soul, filling her mind with dark, twisted images, visions of death, despair, and endless suffering. The room began to spin, and Lisa felt herself slipping into darkness. The last thing she heard was Tom's voice, shouting her name, before everything went black. Lisa woke up to find herself lying on the living room floor, her body drenched in sweat. The cold air that had filled the house earlier was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. Her head throbbed, and her vision was blurry, but she could make out Tom kneeling beside her, his face pale and drawn. "Lisa," he said, his voice trembling. "You're awake. Thank God." "What happened?" she asked, her throat dry and scratchy. Tom shook his head, his eyes darting around the room. "You blacked out. I couldn't wake you up. The doll, it just disappeared. One second it was here, and the next, it was gone." Lisa sat up slowly, her heart racing. "Gone? Are you sure?" Tom nodded, though his expression was far from relieved. "I don't know where it went, but I locked all the doors and windows again. We need to get help, Lisa. This thing, it's not just a doll. It's something evil." Lisa didn't respond. Her mind felt foggy, like she was trapped in a dream she couldn't escape. She rubbed her temples, trying to clear the haze, but it only grew worse. "Lisa?" Tom's voice sounded distant now, muffled like it was underwater. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she managed to say, though the words felt foreign, as if they weren't her own. She stood up, swaying slightly, and Tom reached out to steady her. "You don't look fine," he said, his brow furrowed. "Maybe we should call someone, a priest, a psychic, anyone who can help." Lisa's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no warmth in it. Her eyes, usually so full of life, seemed dull and unfocused. "I'm fine, Tom," she repeated, her voice lower, colder. "There's nothing wrong with me." Tom stepped back, a chill running down his spine. "Lisa, what's going on? You're scaring me." Lisa tilted her head, much like the doll had done earlier, and for a brief moment, Tom swore her eyes flickered with a faint, unnatural glow. "You don't need to be scared," she said, her tone eerily calm. "Everything is under control." The hours that followed were tense and unsettling. Lisa moved through the house with an unnerving calmness, her movements slow and deliberate. She barely spoke, and when she did, her voice sounded hollow, as if something or someone else was speaking through her. Tom tried to stay close, but the distance between them felt insurmountable. He watched her from the corner of his eye, his mind racing with questions. Was this still Lisa, or had the doll done something to her? That night, Tom couldn't sleep. He lay awake in bed, listening to the faint creaks and groans of the house, every sound setting his nerves on edge. Lisa lay beside him, her breathing slow and steady, but something about her presence felt wrong. Around 3 a.m., Tom heard it, a soft, childlike giggle that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. He sat up, his heart pounding. "Lisa?" he whispered, but she didn't respond. The giggle came again, louder this time, and Tom realized with horror that it was coming from the foot of the bed. He reached for the lamp on the nightstand, his hands shaking, and turned it on. Lisa was sitting upright, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, her eyes wide open but unseeing. Her lips were moving, but the voice that came out wasn't hers. It was high-pitched, sing-song, and unmistakably sinister. Tommy, can't you see? She belongs to me." Tom scrambled out of bed, his heart racing. "Lisa, Snap out of it." But Lisa didn't move, her head tilted further, her neck making a sickening cracking sound. "She's gone, Tommy," the voice said. "You can't save her." Tom grabbed her shoulders, shaking her violently. "Lisa, fight it. Don't let it take you." For a moment, her body went limp, and her head lolled forward. Then, with a sudden jerky movement, she looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Tom?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Lisa," Tom cried, pulling her into his arms. "You're back. I thought I lost you." But Lisa didn't hug him back. Her body was stiff, and her breathing was shallow. "Tom," she said weakly, "it's still here. It's inside me." "No," Tom said, shaking his head. "I'll get it out of you. I promise." The next morning, Tom made a decision. He couldn't fight this battle alone. He called Father Martin, a local priest known for dealing with paranormal cases. When the priest arrived, his face was grim, and he carried a leather-bound Bible and a small vial of holy water. "You're dealing with something very old and very dangerous," Father Martin said after Tom explained everything. "This isn't just a haunted doll. It's a vessel for something far more sinister, a demon." Tom's stomach turned. "Can you help her?" Father Martin nodded. "I'll do everything I can, but you must understand, this will not be easy." They set up in the living room, clearing the space of furniture and placing Lisa in a chair in the center. She sat silently, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her expression eerily calm. As Father Martin began the ritual, reading passages from the Bible and sprinkling holy water, Lisa's demeanor changed. Her body tensed, and her eyes rolled back into her head. She let out a guttural growl that didn't sound human. "Leave her," Father Martin commanded, his voice firm. "In the name of God, I cast you out." Lisa's body convulsed, and she let out an ear-piercing scream. The temperature in the room plummeted, and a foul stench filled the air. Shadows danced on the walls, and the sound of laughter echoed all around them. Tom watched in horror as Lisa's face twisted into a grotesque grin. "You'll never win," she snarled, her voice a chilling mix of her own and something inhuman. "She's mine." But Father Martin didn't falter. He pressed the Bible against her forehead, reciting the prayers louder and with more conviction. "The power of Christ compels you." Lisa's screams grew louder, and the shadows in the room seemed to coalesce into a dark, humanoid figure. It loomed over them, its glowing red eyes fixed on Father Martin. "Leave this house," the priest bellowed. "Return to the darkness from which you came." The figure let out an enraged roar before dissipating into black smoke. Lisa collapsed in the chair, her body limp and unresponsive. Lisa lay motionless in the chair as Tom rushed to her side, his hands trembling as he checked her pulse. "She's breathing," he shouted, relief flooding his voice. "Lisa, wake up! Please wake up!" Father Martin, drenched in sweat and visibly shaken, stepped forward cautiously. He placed a hand on Lisa's forehead and muttered a final prayer under his breath. "The demon is gone," he said, though his tone carried a hint of uncertainty. "But she's been through a great ordeal. It may take time for her to recover." Tom looked at the priest, desperate for reassurance. "You're sure it's gone? It won't come back, right?" Father Martin hesitated before responding. "I believe we've banished it. But these things, they're cunning. They look for weaknesses, for ways back in. You must keep this house free of anything that could invite it back. No Ouija boards, no occult symbols, nothing that might open a door to the other side." Tom nodded, Though the priest's words did little to ease his anxiety, he helped Lisa up and carried her to the couch, where she stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering. "Lisa," he said softly, brushing her hair out of her face. Her eyes opened slowly, and for a moment they were filled with fear and confusion. Then recognition dawned, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "Tom," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "It's over, isn't it?" Tom hugged her tightly, his own tears threatening to fall. "Yes, it's over. You're safe now." The days that followed were a mix of relief and unease. Lisa seemed physically fine, but the experience had left deep emotional scars. She was jumpy, easily startled by the smallest noises, and she avoided certain areas of the house, especially the living room, where the exorcism had taken place. Tom did his best to support her, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The house felt different, like a shadow lingered just out of sight, watching them. He tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but the feeling persisted. One night, about a week after the exorcism, Lisa woke up screaming. Tom bolted upright, his heart racing. "What is it? What's wrong?" he asked, turning on the bedside lamp. Lisa was sitting up in bed, her face pale and her eyes wide with terror. "I saw it," she said, her voice shaking. "It was in my dream." "What did you see?" Tom asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Annabelle," Lisa whispered. "She was standing at the foot of the bed, staring at me. She said she's coming back." Tom's blood ran cold. "It was just a nightmare," he said, though he didn't believe his own words. "You're safe now. The priest said it's gone." Lisa shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, Tom, it's not gone. It's still here. I can feel it." Desperate for answers, Tom contacted Father Martin again. The priest agreed to return to the house, though he warned Tom that facing such an entity again could be dangerous. "If it truly hasn't left, it will fight harder to stay this time," he said. When Father Martin arrived, he brought with him another priest, Father Daniels, who specialized in cases involving recurring hauntings. The two men performed a thorough blessing of the house, sprinkling holy water in every room and reciting prayers to cleanse the space of any lingering evil. As they worked, Lisa stayed close to Tom, clutching his arm tightly. "Do you think this will work?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It has to," Tom said, though doubt gnawed at him. "We can't keep living like this." That night, as the priests were finishing the blessing, the house began to shake. The lights flickered, and a deafening roar echoed through the halls. Lisa screamed and clung to Tom as the temperature in the room plummeted. "It's fighting back," Father Martin shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "Keep praying." The priests stood in the center of the living room, their voices rising in unison as they recited passages from the Bible. The shadows on the walls seemed to come alive, twisting and writhing like living things. And then, from the corner of the room, Annabelle appeared. The doll stood upright, its glassy eyes glowing with an unnatural light, its porcelain face twisted into a grotesque grin, and it began to laugh, a high-pitched, maniacal sound that sent shivers down everyone's spine. "You thought you could get rid of me," the doll said, its voice dripping with malice. "I'm not just a doll. I'm far more powerful than you can imagine." Father Daniels stepped forward, holding out a crucifix. "In the name of God, I command you to leave this house." The doll let out a guttural growl, and the crucifix flew out of his hand, shattering against the wall. "Your God has no power here," it hissed. Tom, overcome with fear and anger, grabbed the baseball bat he had used before and swung it at the doll. But the bat stopped mid-swing, as if hitting an invisible barrier. Annabelle's laughter grew louder, filling the room with its sinister echo. "Tom!" Lisa screamed. "Don't! You'll make it worse!" Father Martin stepped forward, his voice booming as he recited a powerful exorcism prayer. "I cast you out, unclean spirit, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Leave this place and never return." The doll began to convulse, its body jerking violently as the room filled with a blinding light. The laughter turned into a piercing scream, and then, with a final deafening crack, the doll shattered into pieces, scattering across the floor. The room was silent. The pieces of Annabelle lay scattered across the floor, shards of porcelain and fabric in a twisted heap. For a moment, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. The house was eerily still, as if holding its breath. Tom stood frozen in place, his hand still gripping the baseball bat. His eyes were wide, locked on the shattered remnants of the doll. Lisa clutched his arm, trembling. "Is it over?" Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible. Father Martin stood motionless in the center of the room, his face pale, his hands clasped in prayer. Father Daniels, too, was still, his eyes scanning the wreckage of the doll. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. We don't know yet," Father Martin said slowly, his voice heavy with uncertainty. "The demon is gone, yes, but the curse, it may linger." Tom's heart sank. "What do you mean? The doll's destroyed. It's over, right?" Father Martin shook his head. "The demon may have been banished, but curses are not so easily undone. The doll was a vessel, a conduit. Even if it's broken, the darkness it carried might still be here." Tom could feel his stomach churn. He wanted to shout, to demand answers, but the weight of Father Martin's words settled on him like a heavy burden. Had they truly won? Or had they only bought themselves a moment of peace? Lisa's grip on his arm tightened. "Tom," she said, her voice trembling, "I feel strange, like something is still watching me." Tom turned to her, his heart pounding. "Lisa, don't say that. I'm not imagining it," she interrupted, her eyes wide with fear. "I can feel it, Tom. It's still here." Father Martin stepped forward, his expression grim. "I'm afraid this isn't over. The curse on this house, it's more deeply rooted than we realized." Suddenly, the air around them grew colder, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow darker. Tom's breath caught in his throat. The house, once so familiar, now felt like a prison, a place where something dark and malevolent lingered, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Father," Tom said, his voice shaky, "what do we do now?" Father Martin's eyes locked onto the broken pieces of the doll. "We must cleanse this house completely. The demon may be gone, but the curse is not. We need to burn the remnants of Annabelle, to destroy every trace of it. Only then can we be sure." The priest's words echoed in Tom's mind as they gathered the broken pieces of Annabelle. It wasn't enough to just throw them away. The cursed doll had to be destroyed completely, reduced to ash, so that its dark influence could never return. The three of them, Father Martin, Father Daniels, and Tom, worked together to collect the remnants of the doll and place them in a metal bucket. Lisa stood in the doorway, watching them, her face drawn with worry. She still felt the weight of the presence in the house, the oppressive feeling that something was waiting for them to make a mistake. Father Martin lit a match and set the pieces of Annabelle on fire. The flames caught quickly, the doll's features distorting as it burned. For a moment, Tom thought he saw the doll's face twist in a final sinister grin, but it quickly disintegrated into ash. The room filled with the acrid smell of burning porcelain and fabric, and Tom felt a strange sense of closure. Maybe this would finally be the end of the nightmare. But as the smoke cleared, something in the air changed. The oppressive weight lifted slightly, but there was still an uneasy stillness that hung over the house. Lisa stepped forward, her eyes wide and searching. "Tom, did you feel that?" Tom nodded, his heart racing. I did." Father Martin and Father Daniels exchanged a glance. "It's not over," Father Martin said softly. "The curse is gone, but the house still holds its memories. The darkness may have been banished, but the echoes remain." Over the next few days, the house felt different, but not in the way Tom had hoped. The uneasy stillness persisted, and Lisa's nightmares grew worse. She would wake up in the middle of the night, screaming, her eyes wide with terror, but when Tom tried to comfort her, she would fall back into an eerie silence. The feeling of being watched never went away. Tom found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, feeling a creeping sense of dread that settled in his bones. The house, once a home, now felt like a place of confinement. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside, sent a shiver down his spine. Lisa's behavior began to change, too. She became more withdrawn, her eyes hollow and distant. She would sit for hours in silence, staring at nothing, her mind seemingly lost in some private world. Tom tried everything he could think of to help her, but nothing seemed to reach her. Then one night, while Tom was cleaning the kitchen, he heard a faint sound from the living room, a soft, almost imperceptible giggle. He froze, his blood running cold. No, not again. But when he rushed into the room, Lisa was sitting on the couch, her back straight, her eyes wide and unblinking. "Lisa?" Tom asked, his voice shaking. Lisa turned to him slowly, a vacant smile on her face. "Tommy," she said in a voice that wasn't hers. "I told you, I'm not going anywhere." Tom's heart skipped a beat as he realized the truth. The curse, the darkness, it hadn't left. It had taken Lisa. The demon had found a new host, and it was using her as its vessel. Tom stood frozen in the doorway, his mind racing as he watched Lisa's vacant smile stretch unnaturally across her face. Her eyes, once filled with warmth and love, were now cold and empty, like two hollow windows into a soul long lost. The voice that came from her lips wasn't her own. It was low, guttural, and filled with an unholy, mocking tone. "Lisa," Tom whispered, his voice trembling. "What are you saying? It's me, Tom, your husband." But Lisa didn't respond to the tenderness in his voice. Instead, she tilted her head to one side, the smile never leaving her face. "Tommy, I told you, I'm not going anywhere," she repeated, her tone now laced with venom. "You can't save me. It's too late." The blood drained from Tom's face. He knew that this wasn't his wife anymore. This was the demon, the same malevolent force that had taken hold of Annabelle. Somehow it had found its way into Lisa, and now it was toying with him, savoring his fear. "No, this can't be happening," Tom whispered, his heart hammering in his chest. "Father Martin said. He said it was over." But deep down, Tom knew the truth. The demon hadn't been banished. It had simply found another way in. Lisa, his beautiful, kind-hearted wife, had become its new victim. He rushed to her side, taking her cold hands in his. "Please, Lisa, fight it, fight it. You're stronger than this." For a moment, there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes, just a fleeting moment, before they clouded over again, and the demon's laughter filled the room. "You're too late," it mocked. "She's mine now, forever." Tom's mind spun. He couldn't just give up. He couldn't lose her. He wouldn't. He thought back to the exorcism, to the priest's warnings. The curse wasn't gone. It had only been dormant, waiting for the right moment to strike again. But now that it had taken Lisa, it wasn't going to let her go without a fight. Tom's eyes darted around the room, desperate for a solution. That's when he remembered something. The doll, Annabelle. The doll was the source of the curse, the vessel that had carried the demon. If they had destroyed it, then why did the curse still linger? Maybe there was a deeper connection, something they hadn't fully understood. He ran to the fireplace, where he had kept the ashes of Annabelle's remains after the exorcism. The metal bucket lay empty now, the remnants of the doll reduced to dust. But the ashes themselves were still potent, still holding the dark power of the curse. He grabbed the bucket, his hands trembling as he spilled the ashes into his palm. Father Martin was right, Tom muttered to himself. The curse isn't gone. It's in the ashes. I need to destroy it. But how? He didn't have much time. The demon inside Lisa was growing stronger. Her body jerked and convulsed, her limbs twitching unnaturally, her neck snapping in ways that weren't humanly possible. The demon was beginning to take full control. "Tom, you can't stop me," it taunted, its voice rasping from Lisa's throat. "You're weak. You'll never save her." Tom clenched his fists, determination flooding his veins. "No, I won't let you take her. I won't lose her." The answer came to him in a flash. He needed help. He needed Father Martin. He needed the strength of the church to fight back. But there was no time. The demon was already too far gone. With a final desperate cry, Tom took the ashes of Annabelle and stepped toward Lisa. He dropped to his knees beside her, clutching the bucket tightly. Father Martin said we had to burn it. Completely. Tom whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. He grabbed a lighter from his pocket and, with shaking hands, set the ashes on fire. The flames roared to life, consuming the dark powder in an instant. The room seemed to shake with the force of the fire, the air thick with an acrid stench. The demon howled in fury, its voice warping as if it were being torn apart. Lisa's body writhed in agony, the demon inside her screaming as it tried to escape. "No!" it screamed. "You can't do this. I will never leave." But Tom didn't stop. He held the flame steady, watching as the ashes burned brighter and brighter until the fire consumed everything, leaving nothing but ash in its wake. Lisa let out one final blood-curdling scream before collapsing to the floor. The room fell silent. Tom's heart pounded in his chest as he rushed to Lisa's side. Her body was still, but the unnatural tension that had filled the air seemed to have vanished. The oppressive weight that had hung over them for so long was finally gone. "Lisa," Tom whispered, shaking her gently. "Lisa, please, wake up." For a long moment, there was no response. Then slowly, Lisa's eyes fluttered open. She blinked, confused, as though waking from a deep sleep. "Tom," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "What happened? Where am I?" Tom's breath caught in his throat. You're okay. You're safe." Lisa looked around, her eyes wide with fear. That voice. It was so real. I thought I was... Tom pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "You're safe. It's over. The demon's gone. You're free." But as the two of them sat there, holding each other in the quiet aftermath, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in the house. The curse may have been broken, the demon banished, but there was still something lingering in the shadows, a reminder of the darkness that had once taken hold of their lives. The battle had been won, but the scars would remain, and Tom knew that he would never forget the terror that had come so close to destroying everything he loved.